Okay, so it's the preview, and I thought that was a pretty good episode. What do you think?
I think that's my favorite one so far.
Oh wow. Okay. What? So we had Joel Newman,
Right?
and he's with Thomas and Denzinger Architects, and he's an architect. So, but what is it that you liked about this show?
It felt simple. It felt like he got to the point very quick. He had his mind made up, very confident about what he was going to say. It felt inspiring, some of the things that he was saying about, now that I think about thinking about it, it was like how, you make your mind up, you have this, not self-conscious, but being conscious about your actions and what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I liked how he talked about the design process, which was something we talked about early on, and just how that working with clients and his approach to getting the design from their brain on the paper, and then from paper to the construction site, which that was a really cool part of it, I think. And I think really just the whole episode was really a positive episode and instilled, what we're trying to accomplish here, which is enhance the world around us. So I really felt like it was a positive episode, and I learned a lot about architecture. I learned a lot about his approach, and I think it somehow helps me be a better engineer as well, and a better person in some ways as well. Yeah. What do you think?
That it helps you?
I mean, what do you think? Or any other thoughts?
I mean, I just love the whole vibe, so to speak, of the show, where it felt like a conversation, a natural conversation where it just flowed.
Yeah.
It felt simple and easy. Loved it.
So for somebody who said he wasn't a social butterfly or whatever his term was, I thought he did a great job. He's a great communicator and made the whole thing easy for me. All I had to do was just kind of egg him on a little bit, so to speak. So
for somebody, he had his mind made up.
All right. Well, is there anything else that the listeners should know about this show?
I don't think so. I think that more surprises await.
Okay. Well, hey, everybody. My name is Andy Richardson. I'm a structural engineer, and I've been doing this 26 years. I'm on a journey to learn more about the AEC industry. So let's go ahead and jump to the intro next.
Welcome to Enhance, an AEC podcast, where we learn the why behind AEC professionals so that you can learn your why.
Okay, well, hey Joel, welcome to the Enhance podcast.
Enhanced what?
So that's our website name for the podcast. That's our podcast name, and it actually comes from, our business name is 2096, but the E we took that and ran with it, for that in terms of our 6 E's, and so that's where the enhance came from.
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense.
Enhancing the world around us is the idea, and it's one of our 6 E's. So we really wanted to find out, about other people in the architecture industry, engineering industry, and construction, the AEC industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. So that's really what this show's all about. So really, I just wanted to start it off with just a little bit of an introduction as far as who you are and everything. So for the audience listening, but we've worked together for quite a while, which is one reason I'm excited about having you on today, because I've known you for a long time, and I don't think we've really had a conversation like this. Most of the time we're talking about projects and engineering and architecture. So it's interesting to find out a little bit more about you, but Joel's an architect. He's been doing this for a long time now.
40 years.
40 years, and mostly focused on the low country of South Carolina, places like Brays Island, Spring Island. If it's got an island behind it, he probably did it, and he probably worked there doing architecture for mostly residential projects.
That's right.
But some other things too. So that's a little bit of an introduction, and I just wanted to start out. First of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and, how you got into this.
Okay. All right. My background is that I'm a dirty Yankee. I came from Michigan originally. I was born on a dairy farm And so I had a background of working really since childhood because we started working when we were kids doing chores and that sort of thing. So I've always been a kind of a worker bee. We moved down south when I was about 10 years old. And so I've been down here for 57 years. I'm 67. And went to school down here, went to Clemson, and that's where I studied architecture and worked, in different places. I worked in Baltimore for a couple of years when I finished school and then moved to North Carolina, to Western North Carolina, unfortunately, where they've just been devastated. That's where I worked. And it was the same environment, same kind of mostly high-end houses inside developments and that sort of thing, and some amenity work usually related to those kind of communities, clubhouse kind of structures and things that have to do with amenitizing those nice communities. And then I've been down here, back home, so to speak, for 30 years.
Yeah.
So I've been here with Thomas and Denzinger for 30 years and running that program for like the last 20 of that 30 years. So that's my background. And you're right, we've worked at all those environments, and Palmetto Bluff is another one. Kiowa is another one. We have another part of our office up in Charleston where we do kind of the work that's on that end of the low country, and we focus down here on this end of the low country.
Okay. So this is called is there a studio name for yours, or?
Where the actual office started in Beaufort. The Thomas and the Denzinger. Thomas is an old family name, and the building that we're in is the Thomas Law Building. So they've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. So
yeah,
the office is actually was part of a lot of history here, including Robert Smalls and the whole thing. It used to be the Customs House. It's a pretty unique place.
Yeah. Okay. And it's a concrete building, the Thomas Law Building.
Thomas Law Building is a brick masonry, a full masonry structure. Most of it was built in the 1850s, and then there was a kind of a strange addition put on it in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And so we're in the old building on the back of it, overlooking the park and out at the river. It's a pretty special spot to be working in, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. And we're sitting here looking over the river right across the street from your office.
That's right.
Pretty much. And we can walk over and work together, but oftentimes we're on the phone or doing things remotely, even though we're right across the street.
That's right.
So Michigan, a lot of people like to talk about where you are from the purpose of your hand or using your hand. So where and if you use your hand, where are you from in Michigan, or do you ever do that?
Right from the center of the mitten, right in the center of your palm near Lansing, Michigan.
Okay. And one of my marketing assistant or marketing, I guess that would be the right person to call her, Teresa. She's from Michigan, so she'll want to know that, and I'm sure some of our listeners will as well. So yeah, that's a good starting point as far as your background, where you're from, and then moving down to the Low Country. But how did you get into architecture?
Sure. So I had an uncle. My mother's brother was an artist and an illustrator, and he's passed away now. He'd be 100 and something now. And was always a real creative influence. And on my mother's side of the family, he and my mother and her sisters were all kind of creative. They were all artistic in one way or another. And I had that same sort of gene or bug, and I always liked to draw, and I always liked to make things ever since I was a little kid. I would build and arrange things and that sort of thing. And my uncle always, even though he wasn't an architect, he always designed and built his own houses. Okay. And his studio, when he moved down to Hilton Head, his studio had all these incredible little chipboard models and things like that in it, and all these cool drawings. And I was always fascinated with that. So when I was pretty young, like probably 12 or 13 years old, I started actually making little cardboard models of buildings and that sort of thing. And I've always been fascinated with barns because I grew up around barns and that sort of thing. And so that was a pretty big influence on me. And when it came time to think about what I was going to do, as far as school was concerned, actually, one of my classmates in high school, one day in calculus, the teacher asked, and he said he was going to go to Clemson and study architecture. And I said, that sounds pretty good. That's literally when I made the decision when I was a senior in high school. And I thought, that sounds like fun. And it turned out to be a really perfect fit because of the nature of being presented with a problem, considering all the facets of it and the context around it, and then coming up with a solution. And it really fit my personality of this sort of problem solving, creation, and then kind of the realization, through drawings and models. And then in the real world, once you become an architect, you actually get to build these things. People actually pay you money. You spend their money essentially to come up with ideas that relate to this place where they're trying to dream build or create something. And we get to realize that over and over again. And that never, ever gets old.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm going to go straight into because I asked my wife, and you've met Esther. So I said, what question should I ask Joel on the podcast? And she's always had this thing about how do you get, because it ties right into what you were just talking about. How do you get the idea of somebody who isn't technical, who isn't an architect, and somehow get that out of them? Like, how do you get there? They kind of have it in their head, what they saw, or maybe pieces of what they saw, but you somehow get it into reality, like an actual
Right.
construction. You get the drawings and see it to fruition. So how does that work? I mean, I don't know if I don't want to give away any trade secrets, but how does that process work for you?
Right. So what you learn over time is that people have a lot of different faculties, and some people are incredibly visual and communicate really, really well and have distinct ideas that they communicate to you, and that becomes part of the context. Some people have absolutely no visual skills at all. Let's say they're more word oriented, or wordsmiths and that sort of thing, and don't have any design bone or any design instinct and whatnot. So every client is different in that respect. And whenever we're starting on a project, I'm not looking for them to know what they want. I'm looking for them to know what they need. And that's an important distinction. I'm not expecting somebody to tell me, I want my house to look like this, and I want, this and that and the other thing. Some people do that. They do provide us with images of things that are inspirational to them. And that's always important and useful. And that's another way of them to communicate. Some people don't have any idea. And so I use the doctor analogy, and I say, I'm not looking for you to tell me how to cure you or tell me, what you have. I want you to tell me where it hurts. What is it that you need? What are the symptoms here? And then I'm going to come up with a diagnosis for it, and I'm going to cure the problem. And so the context is always two things. One is we have a site, whether it's a natural piece of Spring Island that's a beautiful series of magnificent trees and a marsh frontage or a river, or even let's say an interior lot, but it just has some natural characteristics to it, right? That's my job, to go out there, study that, take notes on it, really get my impressions from it. Sometimes it's things I hear, the animals and the wildlife that's going on there, or what kind of noise and factors and the neighbors, and where's the sun, where the breeze is coming from, that sort of thing. It's my job to absorb all of that context, whether it's that kind of site or it's a street site here in downtown Beaufort, or an open site that's going to become a golf course or something. That's my job, to go out there and sense what those factors are. The owner's responsibility is to tell me the things that they need. And quite often people will have strong impressions like, these are the things I need, but I like more privacy. I want more separation. I don't want, let's say, I don't want the big open space. Or you have people who've spent a lifetime living in an old traditional house of rooms, and they say, I want to live in a more open environment, right? So they often have impressions of the way they think they want to head, but I'm not looking for them to tell me the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I take that information from them. Some people have written me a narrative of, the way they imagine they'll live somewhere. And some people they just don't know it all. They just, quite often, if they've hired a particular architect, they've seen some things that that person has done or that firm has done and said, I like the character of these things. In our particular work, it'd be hard for you to go look at all of our work and say, it's all like this. We tend to try to not have a solution and that we're just repeating. And our work is not all Southern living or all, low country, this or that. And sometimes I can't put a name on it, and I really don't try to. It's more the relationship of how it works to that site in that context and that set of people, whoever we're working with, how it relates well. And hopefully if those things marry up, then it really works for them. And people I found, when you finish a project, they really can sense all of that. They can sense the attachment to what they said they want, and they can sense the attachment to place if you've done your job right.
Right. It sounds like a big puzzle that
that's a good description.
You're taking that site, you're taking the person and often a couple or family, and and then you have your experience, and there's all these factors, and you're somehow getting a final product.
That's right.
So it's
That's
really
right.
quite amazing. And then you have to deal with those engineers, right?
They're the weakest part of the story, of course.
Yeah. So why residential?
For some reason, I sort of ended up in that really from the get-go, and I learned pretty early on that is some of the most interesting work, and or maybe a better way to put it is, it's some of the most interesting work for me. I'm not a super social person. I mean, we don't entertain a lot at all and that sort of thing, but I do like interacting with people. And I do find that their part of this puzzle, right, is interesting, and part of it is that every person that we work with has come from some other interesting life story, right? We've had people who had a lot of resources, but they started out, sweeping the floors in the company and ended up owning it. We have people, obviously, that are sometimes very high-level executives, right? And they've had a very high education and that sort of thing. So their story is interesting to me, and it often informs, in a way, what they want, right? And their aspirations. One of the things that's always amusing about a project is that some people have built before, right? Have built a house before, and some people have lived in lots of houses but never built a house. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that you have to determine how to solve the problems that the person that's never built before, and then how to relate to people who maybe have built and feel like, oh, it was difficult. You're always trying to make sure that experience isn't difficult again, right? You're trying to make it as pleasant a process as you can, right? So that's just another part or a facet of the work that makes it interesting. And that always happens with a residential project. If you find yourself doing speculative work, right, there is no client, or there's a generic client. You're trying to create a flavor that's broadly desirable as opposed to something specific to this place.
Mm-hmm.
And that really has little or no interest for me. Any kind of speculative thing is more based on, what's the return going to be versus what's the emotional return, and how have I taken this piece of property and sort of respected it and made a place that is meaningful for these people on this place.
Mm-hmm.
Our projects generally, you can't just like pick this project up and take it over and put it on this site and expect it to have the same kind of aura.
Right. But on the other hand, would you say that, I mean, you can kind of see, okay, that's a Thomas and Denzinger house, or that's a Joel Newman house right there by certain aspects of it? Would you be able to say that? Or is there certain design philosophies that sort of follow from?
I think that we always use the same approach, right? The careful evaluation. And I sit on a number of review boards, and I always bring this word up over and over and over again: context. And in fact, it really doesn't matter what the kind of problem is, whether it's a graphic problem or a social problem or whatever. What's the context surrounding this problem, whether it's architectural or engineering or political or whatever? What's the context around it? And how do we create a meaningful answer, design, solution, building, whatever, to that context? And that's it at the end of the day. It's the context to me that matters. And so we have a lot of details that get repeated, right? That get used. Sometimes they're on projects that look completely different from one another, but there's similar solutions for little bits and pieces. And you're familiar with a lot of those because we've worked together for, 25 years or something like that. So we do have, bits and pieces of our work that are repeated because they fit the right thing. But the building itself is often, contextually different because it has to be to fit that, circumstance or context.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to watch that because of our working together for so long, and we've developed a bit of a synergy, and also just seeing the different projects, and there is a substantial variety. I mean, I can definitely see there's a touch to it that's, to me, it's a Thomas Denzinger touch, but at the same time they're very different, and it's like, wow, this is a wild design, or this is an interesting design. And I mean, do you have any, is it okay to talk about some projects like that some interesting projects that you've worked on over the years that really stood out?
Lots of projects stand out, and projects that are kind of remarkably different from one another, but kind of interesting in terms of the feedback that we've received. One of them would be like the Chichessie Golf Club. The Chichessie Creek Golf Club is one of those projects that, for me, architecturally, it looks very, very traditional. It's a whiteboard and batten. I think most people would drive up and say, oh, this is low country architecture, and that's fine. Very porchy, lots of outdoor space, really strong contextual relationship of every space around this building, which is kind of what I think of as an additive building, meaning there's lots of parts of it and it's kind of sprawled on a site, but each element is very specific to, it's on this part of the golf course, or it's over at this part of the golf course because of its relationship. And in the course of 40 years of being a licensed architect, I probably had more people comment on that place, and I mean it as that place, than almost any other project that we've ever done. And so I think architecturally, it's unremarkable in that it's, it looks like a piece of everywhere in the low country, right? It relates very well in that respect. but environmentally and emotionally, it really connects with people when they use it and experience it. And that's the kind of thing that you really hope for with any project. So that's a very traditional, and we're building a house right now, a couple of houses that have some similarities that you've worked on with us. And one of them is at Spring Island. It was a very challenging site. I met over the years at least a half a dozen prospects that considered this piece of property, and it had an incredible, riverfront that could have a dock. It sat beside a pond, but the lot was extremely narrow.
Mhm.
The lot was very low, and about, I'd say almost a third of the lot was essentially in the pond. There was a lot of low areas that, would be inundated with water and that sort of thing. So very challenging circumstances. And when people look at a situation like that, it either ignites interest because they see these values in it and the constraints, or they say, not for me, too difficult,
Mhm.
too challenging, looks too restrictive, like I can't have what I want. And I think you'd actually find a lot of architects would say this, that what looks like a really challenging site often leads to some of the most interesting work you'll ever do, because you really can't just say, oh, I'm going to take this thing I did before and I'm going to stick it on here and it'll work fine. Really was such a unique context, and we had to come up with solutions, even with soils engineers. And soils engineers are probably more hidebound than almost any other engineer, right? They're dealing with the ground conditions that exist, and they have a set of typical solutions for dewatering and restabilizing and replacing and compacting and that sort of thing. And a site like this, we literally had to invent a kind of a detail that would allow us to essentially build, let's say, the remaining third of the site that we needed to make this house fit this context.
Yeah.
And we had a soils engineer who was, older and experienced and creative enough that I could propose something to him that sort of fit with what he needed, and that he could envision it as a solution and then work with us to make it a solution. And it became the stone burrito, which we've now used in a couple of instances on really difficult sites. And the truth is, in this part of the world, in places like Spring Island and Braze Island that have been around a while, we're getting to the sites that people put off from buying or developing because they weren't the high land and that sort of thing. Beautiful views, but more challenging physical conditions, right?
Yeah.
And so it's leading to having to come up with more creative solutions with the soils engineers and with you guys, and even we with mechanical systems and that sort of thing. And that's just more interest, right?
Yep.
That's just more. And for me, anything that's a problem is really just an opportunity. The truth is that every problem is an opportunity to look at something and think, is there a better way to do this? Is there something we can do that can meet this situation and come out with something even better? So that particular project has ended up creating, those restraints have created a really unique project, and have had some really amazing feedback from real estate and people that have looked at it and can just recognize how carefully fitted to that context that house is and how special it'll be when it's complete.
Yeah, and I know the job you're talking about. So that one is a beautiful home. We've been to it together, and I remember when the stone burrito term was coined, and It's never really put like that to me. You have a few of those, which are always fun, but I think it definitely is a good system. And can you just tell? I mean, I think this is for some of the engineers and contractors would probably be more interested to know, like, how does that system work?
Sure.
Kind of dig down into the details of that
Sure.
one a little bit.
Sure. So this was a typical condition where, you dig into the ground, you get water. And the first solution for most soils engineers is to propose dewatering, which is a successful thing in some contexts, and removing soil, 1, 2, 3, 4 feet, just depends on what the conditions are in the borings, and trying to get down to what is considered, stable conditions, and then dewatering, and then backfilling and compacting and bringing things up in lifts to get back to a suitable elevation that is compacted, stable, and dry so that you can build. And in this context, we're literally on the toenails of a pond, a very shallow pond. It's only about 1 foot to 1.5 feet deep, but you dig a hole in the ground, it's going to fill up with water. It's literally adjacent to the pond within feet or inches virtually. And we had a little bit of experience on a site at Braze Island where, pretty similar to this, we decided that what we needed to do was consider just scraping off the organic matter, which is your top 10, 12 inches of, detritus, just leaf rot and root mass and organic material, essentially, that's accreted over, thousands of years. Take that off and then put stone on that. That's something that we did at a site at Braze Island, very successful. It created a stable base. Here, the idea was you don't want to dig 4 feet of soil out. You will never dewater the hole because you've essentially made a place for this pond to flow in, and there's no place to pump the water out to dewater to, right? Mm-hmm. So no way to do that. So we did essentially a kind of a hybrid idea. We took the organic matter off the top surface, which is, uncompactable. We put about 1 foot of large stone on the site, and then essentially compacted that in with a roller. And then that was just to make a stable base. And we knew that water would move in and out of that stone, and that was okay. But we're essentially displacing that one layer of organic material. Then we put down a fabric, a geotextile, and we also used one of the Tensar, one of those products that is like the geomat, like it's like the equivalent of rebar, right?
Yeah.
Put that layer of material down, and then put down stone again, wrapped the burrito up, in other words, pulled the fabric up over it and made it essentially like a giant stone burrito. And then we're able to put soil over that and cap it essentially. And we could compact that to make sure it was all locked down in place. And it didn't matter if water moved in or out of that, because that was stabilized and couldn't go anywhere. And the reason for the fabric wrapping up the burrito is essentially so that none of our stone could migrate horizontally, right? We had it contained. That created a very stable base that we could build on, that we could dig into that compacted fill on top enough to pour a slab and footings and that sort of thing, and build from there on up.
Okay, so there was a layer of soil on top of this burrito.
Right. That's right.
And yeah, so that stone burrito really created a nice, almost like a footing the size of the house.
Exactly right.
And then we put soil on top of that, and then built the actual foundation, which, this is the Low Country, of course, and it's they call it Low Country for a reason, because it's low. For one reason, but we don't have to worry about the, like Michigan, for example, because there may be some people that are from Michigan and they're like, well, how do you do that? But we don't have the
We don't have
line
frost,
and
right?
things,
So we don't have to dig 4 feet down in the ground to put a footing in.
But we got other issues like hurricanes, which we just had. So, so I want to get in a little bit about, my work briefly, and then just a couple more questions, I think, and then we'll get you out of here since,
Sure.
and so I think it's been really informative so far and really enjoyed it so far, but wanted to be a little selfish and talk about structural engineering a bit and maybe some of the challenges that you faced, working with these dang engineers, for example.
Yep.
So, and yeah, let's talk about that for a minute.
So, worked with engineers forever. And I feel like you and I went years ago through a little bit of a training process. My initial experience with engineers when I started working in Baltimore was that quite often they had a set of sort of trained responses to a lot of boilerplate problems, and that they were absolutely able and willing to be creative, but quite often had to be sort of ooched in that direction to say, what if we do this?
Right.
What if we look at this? And I think that when you and I first met, which has been a long time ago, I think that you came from that same kind of training, that we have a set of solutions to these problems, and that's a good place, that's a good base to start from. And I think that what you learn, it doesn't matter whether you're an architect or an engineer or a builder or whatever, over time, over a career, you learn that there are other ways of solving problems. And you would have come to that naturally, whether you ever ran into us or not. But that's always been my mindset, is to look at things and say, okay, that would work, could we do this? And usually it's driven by some background, something that seems like that typical solution isn't, it's not the right fit for, again, this context. And it always rolls back to context. And so I think part of our solution and our success in our work together has been that you've gotten broader, we've gotten broader, right? We find out what do most people do with this situation, and if that's the best solution, great. And then we look at, well, is there other things that we could do? And I think that's been probably the best part of our collaboration, is the flexibility to look at something and say, maybe we could do this way. You have the evaluative skills to look at that and say, yeah, that works too. And so that's been kind of the basis of our work always. We tend to go over a project with you and quite often point out what we see as the probable problems with it,
right,
and give you the opportunity to come up with both this is what we have been doing and this is what we could do kind of solutions. And I think, again, that's been the success of our collaboration.
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, I think that kind of answers that question pretty well. I want to go into a little bit. I think one thing that I really appreciate about you is your approach to a project as a whole, because things can go sour at times on a project. I mean, almost every project has a potential to go sour. So I think you have a certain style of management, project management, whatever you want to call it. But how do you help that process be more smooth during the construction process, design process, really the whole thing? Like, how do you manage that?
Age and experience. I think that what I have learned over a long period of time is to be as unflappable as I can be. And my bigged frustration with any kind of problem is when people sort of lock down and instead of trying to come up with a solution, spend too much time at the beginning of any problem trying to figure out whose fault it is, or who's going to be responsible, or who's going to pay, or whatever. And so my approach has always been, what's the solution to this problem first?
Mm-hmm.
We can figure out who shot JR later.
Right.
But problem number one is, how do we get this, whether it's construction that is has some kind of impediment to it where somebody is not performing, or somebody has disturbed somebody else's work, or a solution that's been proposed is not going to work either because the materials aren't available, or the labor to do it isn't available. Always some kind of impediment on every project. That's absolutely true. But really a kind of a persistent desire just to find the solution and move on. You'll solve those other problems if the design problem, or the supply problem, or the production problem is resolved. Who's gonna pay for it, or how's it gonna get resolved, generally flows pretty well after that. And so that's always been my approach, is not to get overly excited about something, as a problem, because that anxiety or anger or anything like that, it's not going to move it forward. It's
Right.
not going to, it's not going to move it off of the impediment. So,
Yeah. Okay. Good. I like that. And that's one reason, because we want to, again, selfishly for our company and the projects we're working on, I like when projects are a success. So I want to tag along with people that are working on successful projects.
Sure.
So that, and for anybody that's, going to work with you, it's good to know that.
Yeah.
Hey, this project's if it kind of goes a little bit south or has potential to go that way, then we can bring it back, so
that's a pretty common, sentiment. And one thing that, you'll hear from time to time is people are anxious about building because they've heard about the brain damage of, the difficulties and that sort of thing. And I always tell people, really, when I have an initial interview, that I feel like it's a little bit the responsibility of the architect. They typically have been considered a little bit of the ringleader or organizer or manager of the process, that I think it's a little bit of our responsibility to make it as reasonable and for me, enjoyable an experience as possible. Especially with residential projects, you're always dream building, right? Mm-hmm. People are maybe, especially people building for the first time, you want that to be an enjoyable experience. There's going to be pitfalls. There's going to be things that cost too much or take too much time. You have to be able to weather that and help people get beyond that. And hopefully at the end of the job, they see it and they go, okay, we had to wait longer than we thought. It cost more than we thought, but wow, we made it to the end, and this is really amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's that sounds really, really inspiring. But sometimes you do go home at the end of the day, and you have a life outside of work. Is there things you like to do outside of work? Like, tell us a little bit about your personal life. Is there anything fun you like to do, or hobbies, or maybe something that the average person doesn't know about Joel?
My home life is similar in a sense to my work life. I like to make things, and so I'm always making something, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. I've just about done building a screen porch on the back of our house, where all the materials were delivered at the street and had to be toted to the backyard, and we built a pretty significant porch back there, which is now essentially done, and you helped us with the engineering and so forth on it, which was great.
Thanks, Taylor.
Exactly. I've built some guitars. I've built furniture. I've always sort of continuously making something. So I like to make things. I like to draw on paint and do all kinds of things. So there's never a time that there isn't, a project or a few projects that are, sort of bubbling along. And for me, my whole life, essentially, that's been a way of sort of marking a period of time, right? You can look back and look at a drawing or painting you've done or experience. The porch took 2 years to build. I learned a long time ago through all the renovations that I've done in every place I've ever lived that you just start something. It doesn't matter if it takes a year or 2 years or 5 years. It's not going to get done until you start. So you start it and, a couple of years pass and you go, this is all done. What am I going to do next? Right.
Yeah.
I have that same feeling about all the work that we do for our clients. They often start it and say, it's going to take 2 years to do this and all. I can't remember when projects start and when they end anymore because I just think it's just the flow of what we do, and you're going to be in it, and I'm going to see you at Spring Island or somewhere 2 years from now, and you're going to have been in your house for 2 years or 4 years, and I'm not even going to remember when you moved in or when we started it because it's just kind of part of the flow of things. So it's generally my own life is making things, and what I get to do for a living is just kind of helping other people make things, which is it's as good as it gets. So
Awesome.
Again, I feel like my life has ended up fitting together in a way that suited my personal afflictions.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool because it shows like the 17-year-old guy who said, I want to be an architect. It wasn't quite as flippant as maybe it sounded at the beginning because, I mean, it really connected.
It fit.
Yeah, it fit.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing a little bit about your personal life and letting us know that, hey, you do go home at night and do other things. So, but I really want to get into the last aspect of this, which is the name of the show, the name of the podcast, which is Enhance. And I think we've already hit on a lot of these aspects, which is the why. Like, why do this? Like the 17-year-old, why go into architecture? I mean, you could do anything. And how are you enhancing the world around us? And it sounds a little bit, and I say a lot of times it sounds a little bit cheesy, right, to say that. But at the same time, sometimes we have to kind of dig deep to really think about those things. But again, I think we've kind of already covered some of that. But what inspires you? What drives you? Like, what's the why behind what you do?
That's the easiest thing to me. And it's the difference. There are different ways of practicing any profession or really any work. You can do it consciously and intentionally, or you can do it as a kind of an afterthought. And that might sound a little broad, but I could easily make a living as an architect, creating, plans and selling them and never having any contact with the person that was going to buy them, where that plan was going to be built, how it suited that environment, and that would be okay. That is a very viable business. It can be its own rewarding experience, right? There are people that are creating things and they're nice and they speak to people and they actually, quite honestly, they fit an economic niche that works really well. So that's a good business model. That is less enhanced and less involved than the personal relationship where you're actually meeting somebody one-on-one and doing a more tailored and more conscious and more intentional and enhanced experience where we're working on this specific place on earth. It has specific contextual things about it, right? The plants that are growing here, the bushes, the trees, the wildlife that's here, the surrounding buildings and what those people are like, and their barking dog and the the birds in the trees and the golfers out in the course swearing, whatever it may be, and making that a holistic solution that really fits that context and enriches that person's life on that piece of ground on earth. That's what drives me. That's why we don't do just speculative or just generic work. We do specific work, and that speaks to everything about being conscious and being specific and being sort of enhancing, informative, enriching of somebody's experience of buying a little patch of this really wonderful place where we are.
Right. That's awesome. And I mean, really, it's somebody's dream, and you're helping.
It's dream building.
You're helping them fulfill that. I mean,
it's dream building.
That's really cool. So, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, this is the really last question I have is just an opportunity because I mean, have you ever been on a podcast, by the way?
I have never been. Well, I have done one Spring Island interview thing.
Okay.
So it might be a podcast. I don't know. I've seen it. Anyway.
So the point of the question is, I mean, this may be an opportunity to share something that perhaps you want to get out there to the world. I don't know what there might be as far as architecture or otherwise, but is there anything else you want to share and document?
I can't think of anything specific. I think I think I've addressed the things that are meaningful to me, and I think that what I always wish is that people will be kind of more aware, more conscious of what they're doing, and let's say the impact on whatever they're doing on wherever they are, and that'll make their own experience better, and it'll probably make the world just a little bit better. So I think that's a good approach to take to anything, is just try to be a little bit more, not self-conscious of it, but conscious of what you're doing,
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's a great lesson. Just, I mean, because it's not just about architecture. It's not just about engineering. It's about this, that we're having a relationship. I mean, we've been working together for, like you said, 20 something years, and we still get along. And we've had some interesting times where we have had to kind of wrestle with ideas and things, and we somehow came out of it.
That's right.
Successfully. So, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of being a part of the work that you're talking about. So it's pretty exciting. So
yep.
Thanks for being on Enhanced today, and glad to have you. And
I enjoyed it.
Glad to be a friend with you.
I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And see you next episode.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to today's episode